A millionaire came across a young girl, crying in the rain, and living on the streets, and he took her home. Moments later, he was stunned to see that the girl had his late wife's brooch tucked away in her purse. The city's bustling streets hummed with the chaotic rhythm of the late afternoon rush. Amidst the hurried throng, a small figure stood out, not through speed but through her calm, quiet presence. Sophia, just 8 years old, sat hunched against the cold stone of a towering building. Her wide brown eyes, framed by a gaunt and grimy face, watched as people bustled by. Her disheveled, dull black hair hung messily over her frail shoulders, hidden beneath a tattered jacket. The mismatched rags she wore, patched and faded, hung loosely on her thin frame, a clear sign of hunger's toll. Her bare feet, dirty, cracked, and calloused, quietly told the story of the many miles she'd walked through the unforgiving streets. Why does no one notice me? Why do they just walk past me as though I were part of the pavement? Can they see me through these rags? Or do they only see one more person on the street? Sophia thought, her inner voice heavy with a sorrow too vast for someone her age. With trembling hands, she clutched a piece of stale bread to her chest, the only meal she had for the day, given to her by a compassionate woman who had passed earlier. Her stomach ached, urging her to eat, but something inside held her back, keeping her from tearing into the bread. She scanned the street, looking for someone who might need it more than she did. Then she spotted a young mother, equally dirty and ragged, just like herself, holding a crying baby. The woman, not far from where Sophia sat, looked just as lost and desperate as she felt. Maybe I can make someone smile today, even if I can't smile for myself, Sophia murmured quietly to herself, gathering what little courage she had. Slowly she stood up, her thin legs shaky beneath her. Each step was a struggle against hunger and weakness. People passed by, not seeing her, as though she were just another shadow among the many on the sidewalk. Finally, she reached the young mother, who regarded her with a mix of surprise and caution. Without saying a word, Sophia held out the piece of bread. The mother, tears welling in her eyes, hesitated for a moment before gratefully accepting the offering. "Thank you, sweet child. You're like an angel sent from heaven," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Sophia's heart warmed at the words, even as her stomach growled louder in protest. She watched as the mother broke the bread and fed the baby, whose cries stopped almost immediately. For a brief moment Sophia forgot her own hunger, lost in the simple joy of knowing she'd made a difference, no matter how small. Even if people act like I'm invisible, I can still help someone. I want to be a light, even while I'm surrounded by darkness. Mom always told me to be kind, no matter the circumstances, Sophia thought, a fragile smile gracing her lips at the memory of her mother. She longed for her in that moment. Suddenly, the sky darkened dramatically, as if in response to her thoughts. Thick, menacing clouds gathered above, transforming day into an early night. A distant rumble of thunder made Sophia flinch instinctively. The people around her picked up their pace, scrambling to find shelter from the approaching storm. "Oh no, where will I go? Where can I hide? With this rain it will get so cold. These are the worst nights," she murmured to herself, panic creeping into her chest. Then the rain began to pour, first in a few scattered drops, then in a torrential downpour. Sophia ran, her bare feet slipping on the wet pavement, desperately searching for cover. But every door was locked, every entrance blocked. The people around her hurried into taxis, stores, and buildings, leaving her more alone with each passing moment. "Please, can someone help me? I don't want to be alone in this storm. Is there anywhere I can stay? Just until the rain stops?" she cried out, her voice barely audible over the storm. The rain lashed the main avenue, turning it into a chaotic river of rushing umbrellas and sliding cars. In the middle of all the confusion, Sophia began to cry desperately, unsure of where she could find shelter. "Mom, why did you have to leave? Why am I all alone in this huge, scary world?" Her sobs blended with the rain as she wept. Amidst the confusion of the avenue, a luxurious car crept along, its headlights slicing through the downpour like sharp blades. Behind the wheel sat Robert, a man with kind features and the sharp, calculating eyes of someone who navigated big business. His attentive gaze swept over the street, more out of habit than genuine concern. But then something caught his eye, a small stumbling figure on the sidewalk, moving as though she were an injured animal, shivering with cold, her cries piercing the storm. Robert's brow furrowed, and his hand moved to the steering wheel instinctively. What is a child doing alone out here in this weather? Should I stop? Or is this some sort of trap? He murmured to himself, torn. He slowed down further, his gaze never leaving Sophia. Now she was barely able to crawl, her strength almost gone. She looked up, meeting his eyes through the windshield for a brief moment. Time seemed to freeze. My God, Robert gasped, his voice trembling. Those eyes, they remind me of someone. But who? How could that be? His heart raced. With his mind spinning, Robert made up his mind. He guided the car toward the curb, ignoring the honks and protests of the drivers behind him. His hand shook as he unbuckled his seatbelt, his focus entirely on the girl, now just a few meters away. Hey, little one. Are you okay? Do you need help? Why are you out here alone in the rain? Don't you have somewhere to go? Robert called out, his voice nearly drowned by the storm's roar. Hearing him, Sophia turned slowly, her eyes wide with fear, locked on Robert's. For a moment she seemed to consider running, the fear of strangers clearly ingrained in her. But the cold, exhaustion, and desperate need for shelter urged her forward, her faltering steps bringing her closer to the car. No, I don't have a home. Please, sir, I just need a dry place. Just until the rain stops. I promise I won't be a bother, she whispered, her voice barely audible, trembling with cold. Robert's heart clenched at the sound of her voice, so young yet carrying so much pain. It hit him like a punch to the gut. Without another thought, he opened the car door, hesitating just for a moment before gesturing for her to get in. Come on, get in. You'll catch pneumonia out there, he said gently, trying to make his voice as comforting as possible. Sophia hesitated, years of mistrust warring with her desperate need for safety. She took a tentative step, then another, until she finally stood beside the car. Robert noticed how much Sophia was shaking now, her lips tinged blue from the cold. I'm not going to hurt you, I promise, he said softly, trying to reassure her. I just want to help. What's your name, little one? Sophia took a shaky breath, summoning the courage to speak. Sophia, she whispered. My name is Sophia. With those words she finally climbed into the car, leaving a small puddle of water on the leather seat. Robert quickly turned on the heater, glancing at her from the corner of his eye. Now that she was closer, the resemblance to someone he was struggling to remember became even more striking. His heart raced, a mix of fear and hope beginning to grow inside him. Sophia, he repeated quietly, almost as if he were testing the sound of her name. That's a beautiful name, he said, then paused. I'm Robert. Do you have any family around here, Sophia? Sophia lowered her eyes, nervously clutching the hem of her soaked t-shirt. No, sir, she whispered. I don't have anyone. I'm alone now. Her voice trembled as she bit her lip, fighting back tears. Robert felt a surge of emotions, compassion, concern, and something deeper, something he couldn't quite place. He studied her face carefully, tracing the lines of her eyes, the curve of her chin. Everything about her seemed to echo someone he was desperately trying to remember. Who does she remind me of? Why does she feel so familiar? He thought, his heart pounding. Is this a sign that I should care for her? Why do I feel this overwhelming need to protect her? But what if I'm imagining things? Robert tried to shake off the confusion. He turned his focus back to Sophia, who was still trembling despite the warmth filling the car. His gaze moved over her wet clothes, her dripping hair, and her lips still slightly blue from the cold. Without thinking, he grabbed a soft blanket from the back seat and handed it to her. Here, little one. Wrap yourself in this. It'll help you warm up faster, he said gently. Sophia hesitated for a moment before taking the blanket, wrapping it tightly around her like a protective cocoon. Thank you, sir, she murmured, her voice still shaking. You're very kind. You're someone special. Most people wouldn't care about me. Robert smiled softly, feeling a rush of protectiveness flood over him. He started the car, the windshield wipers working tirelessly against the relentless downpour. Well, Sophia, he said, his voice calming, you don't need to thank me, but we should get out of here. You must be hungry. How about getting something to eat? Sophia's eyes widened, a mixture of hope and skepticism shining in them. I don't want to bother you, sir, she replied hesitantly, her lip trembling. You've already done so much by helping me out of the rain. Robert shook his head. It's no bother at all. You need to eat. Living on the streets can't be easy. As he drove through the rain-slicked streets, Robert couldn't help but steal glances at Sophia. The warmth from the car and the blanket seemed to calm her, and she relaxed just a little. Clearing his throat, Robert decided to ask, So Sophia, you said you're alone. How long have you been? Well, on the streets. Sophia curled into herself a little more, her fingers gripping the edge of the blanket. It's been 3 months, I think, she replied softly. Since my mom. Her voice faltered, and she swallowed hard before continuing. Since my mom was gone. Robert's heart clenched. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, fighting the urge to pull over and embrace the girl. I'm so sorry, Sophia. That must have been so hard for you. Sophia just nodded, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. My mom was all I had. She always said that one day she'd finally tell me who my father was. She paused, her voice catching. But, she choked on the words, her emotions overwhelming her. Robert's heart skipped a beat. Your father? He asked gently. You don't know him? Sophia shook her head. Mom said he didn't know about me, that he left the country before he even knew she was pregnant. Robert felt a deep ache in his chest as he listened to her story. He opened his mouth to ask more, but before he could, his phone rang, cutting through the heavy silence. Glancing at the caller ID, he saw his sister Caroline's name flashing on the screen. It's my sister, Robert explained, looking at Sophia, who was now staring at him curiously. I need to take this. Sophia nodded, shrinking further into her seat as Robert pressed the button to answer on speakerphone. Robert? Where the hell are you? Caroline's sharp voice cut through the car. I've been waiting for you for an hour for dinner. Robert frowned, suddenly remembering his dinner plans. Sorry, Caroline, he said, glancing at Sophia. I had an unexpected situation. Unexpected situation? Caroline's voice dripped with irritation. What's more important than having dinner with your only sister? Robert hesitated, unsure how to explain. It's complicated, Caroline. I found someone who needs help. Minutes later, the car slid smoothly into the driveway of Robert's impressive mansion, the headlights slicing through the rainy gloom. Sophia, still wrapped in the blanket, stared out the window in awe, her wide eyes reflecting the bright lights illuminating the mansion's grand facade. Robert parked, turned off the engine, and turned to her with a gentle smile. Well, here we are, Sophia, he said, his voice soft and soothing. This is my home. Let's get inside, and I'll get you something dry to wear. Sophia nodded, still in shock at the size and beauty of the house. It's such a big house, she whispered as they stepped out of the car. It looks like a fairy tale castle. The front door swung open suddenly, revealing Caroline, dressed elegantly for dinner, her face initially showing irritation, but quickly shifting to surprise when she saw Sophia. Robert guided Sophia toward the entrance, feeling the tension rise with each step. Robert, what is the meaning of this? Caroline hissed, her eyes glaring at Sophia. Who is this child? What's going on here? Her tone dripped with disdain as she took in Sophia's appearance. Robert instinctively placed a protective hand on Sophia's shoulder. Caroline, this is Sophia. I found her on the street, alone in the rain. She needs our help, he explained, his voice firm but careful. Please, let's go inside. We can talk in there. Caroline crossed her arms, blocking the entrance. Her sharp eyes never left Sophia. Robert, have you lost your mind? You can't just bring a beggar into the house. What if she steals something? What if this is part of some scam? Sophia shrank back, her eyes welling with tears. Robert's protective instincts flared. Enough, Caroline. Sophia is a scared, lonely child. She's staying here, even if it's just for tonight. Now please let us in. Reluctantly, Caroline stepped aside, allowing Robert and Sophia to enter. The grand interior of the mansion loomed before them, with its towering entrance hall and gleaming marble staircase. Sophia gazed around in awe as Robert led her through the opulent space, Caroline trailing behind with a look of disapproval in her eyes. As they moved through the house, Sophia's gaze wandered, stopping when something on the walls caught her attention. It was a large framed photo of a graduating class, with dozens of smiling faces dressed in caps and gowns. all facing the camera. But one face in the middle made Sophia's heart race. A young woman, glowing with happiness, looked strikingly familiar. Sophia felt her breath catch in her throat. The woman looked so much like her mom. Just a younger version, probably a teenager. It must just be a coincidence, she thought, trying to dismiss the feeling. But as her gaze lingered on the image, the resemblance became undeniable. The same facial features, the same warm smile, and pinned to the woman's gown was a brooch, identical to the one Sophia had tucked away in her pocket. Sophia's hand instinctively reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing the familiar shape of the brooch her mother had given her. Her mind buzzed with confusion. How is this possible? Who is this woman? Why does she have a brooch just like my mom's? Robert noticed Sophia's intense focus on the photograph. That's my college graduation class, he commented casually, unaware of the emotional storm stirring inside the girl. Good times back then. Sophia simply nodded, her mind swirling with unasked questions. She wanted to ask about the woman in the photo, but something inside told her to hold back. A voice inside her urged her to remain silent and not become too inquisitive. Come on, Sophia. Let's get you some dry clothes. Robert's voice brought her back to the present. He gently led her away from the photograph and toward the stairs. Sophia stole one last glance at the image, her heart heavy with questions she wasn't ready to ask. Mom, she thought, her chest tightening. I miss you so much. Maybe I'm just imagining things. Wishing you were here with me. With each step she took, Sophia clutched the brooch in her pocket, the only piece of her mother she had left. A fragile link to a past that was slowly becoming clearer, yet more mysterious. Minutes later, Sophia sat quietly in one of the plush chairs in the dining room, feeling like an outsider among the lavish surroundings. Robert sat at the head of the table, while Caroline seated herself opposite Sophia, casting disapproving glances at the girl. Dinner proceeded in an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the clinking of silverware on fine china. Sophia ate her soup quickly, barely tasting it, aware of Caroline's watchful gaze. So, Sophia. Caroline broke the silence, her voice sweet but laced with suspicion. Where are you from? You must have a family somewhere. Sophia swallowed hard, feeling the lump form in her throat. Robert shot his sister a warning look. I don't have anyone, Sophia said quietly, barely above a whisper. My mother, she's gone. A few months ago. Robert felt his heart tighten at the sorrow in her voice. Caroline scoffed, clearly not convinced. And your father? Surely there's someone who can take care of you. It's not my brother's job to take in every street urchin he finds. Her words cut through the air, sharp and cruel. Robert's disapproval was evident as he glared at his sister. That's enough, Caroline, he snapped, his voice firm with barely contained frustration. Sophia is our guest, and you will treat her with respect. Sophia shrank back into her chair, wishing she could disappear. Caroline's voice dripped with contempt. Guest? Robert, you've brought a beggar into our home. This is insane. And what if she's part of some scheme? What if there are more people out there waiting to rob us? She laughed mockingly, gesturing wildly toward the windows, as if expecting a mob of thieves to rush in. Sophia's stomach twisted, and she dropped her spoon, losing her appetite completely. I'm sorry, she mumbled, her voice shaky. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Before she could leave, her trembling legs carrying her away from the table, Robert reached her first. Sophia, wait. You're not going anywhere, he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. This is your home now, as long as you need it. He shot a stern look at Caroline. And if anyone is leaving, it won't be you. At that moment, Sophia stumbled, her small bag slipping from her grasp. It fell to the floor, spilling its contents onto the polished marble. Among the scattered items was her mother's brooch, which gleamed under the chandelier's light as it came to rest at Robert's feet. The brooch caught everyone's attention in the room. Robert bent down slowly, picking up the delicate item. His eyes widened as he recognized it, a rush of emotions sweeping through him. This brooch, he thought, his voice trembling. Where did you get this, Sophia? Sophia, still shaken by the near confrontation, answered in a choked voice. It was my mother's, she whispered. She gave it to me before she left. It's all I have left of her. Tears filled her eyes as the memory of her mother's last gift overwhelmed her. Caroline, who had been watching the scene with growing irritation, exploded. "Don't you see what's happening here, Robert?" she snapped. "This girl is clearly manipulating you. First, she shows up out of nowhere. And now she conveniently has a brooch that you recognize? I bet she planned all of this. She's probably trying to pass herself off as your long-lost daughter or something. Just to get her hands on your money." She pointed an accusing finger at Sophia, her voice venomous. Robert's shock and anger flared. "How can you say such a thing, Caroline? Sophia is just a scared, lonely child. She's not trying to deceive anyone." Turning to Sophia, he added softly, "That's not true, is it? Sophia, you're not trying to trick me, are you?" Before Sophia could respond, Robert's phone rang loudly, cutting through the tension. He glanced at the caller ID and frowned. "It's the office. I need to take this," he said, his tone sharp. He looked at Caroline with a warning glance. "Behave, both of you. I'll be back in a minute." With that, he stepped out of the room, leaving Caroline and Sophia alone. The silence between them was deafening. Caroline's calculating gaze bore into Sophia, who tried not to shrink under the scrutiny. Finally, Caroline broke the silence with a voice as cold as ice. "Listen here, you little imposter," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "I don't know what game you're playing, but it's over. You're leaving right now." Before Sophia could protest, Caroline grabbed her by the arm, yanking her out of the chair. "But Robert said I could stay," Sophia stammered, struggling to break free. Caroline's grip tightened. "Robert's not here, is he? And by the time he gets back, you'll be gone." Minutes later, Caroline had shoved Sophia into her luxury car and sped away from the mansion. Sophia, trembling with fear and confusion, could barely breathe as the familiar streets faded away, giving way to unfamiliar, more ominous neighborhoods. "Please, please take me back," she pleaded, her voice trembling barely above a whisper. "I swear I didn't do anything you're accusing me of. I don't want anyone's money. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't know you had seen the brooch before." Caroline let out a bitter laugh, her gaze fixed firmly on the road ahead. "Take you back? For what? So you can keep deceiving my brother?" She sneered coldly, her words cutting through the air. "No, dir. You belong here on the streets with the other beggars." Without another word, the car came to a sudden halt on a dimly lit, almost deserted street. "Now get out," Caroline demanded. Sophia froze in fear, rooted to the seat. But Caroline, growing impatient, swung open the passenger door and practically shoved her out onto the cold pavement. "Beggars don't belong in our family," she spat. "Stay away from my brother." With that, she slammed the door shut and sped off, leaving Sophia alone in the darkness. The fading sound of the car's engine seemed to snap Sophia from her trance, and she began to look around, her chest tightening with growing panic. Unknown streets stretched out in all directions, each one looking more menacing than the last. She had no idea where to go, so she started walking, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the eerie silence of the night. Desperately she thought, "Robert, please find me. Don't leave me alone again." For a moment Sophia stood still, watching the disappearing red taillights of Caroline's car as it vanished into the night. The weight of her reality came crashing down on her, heavy and suffocating. She was alone again, abandoned in a strange and dangerous place. Her first steps were uncertain, as though her body was still in shock. Fear and confusion flooded her, making her heart race wildly. The dark streets seemed to stretch endlessly, each corner more threatening than the last. "Mom, why does this always happen to me? Why can't I have a home?" she whispered to herself, tears falling freely down her cold cheeks. Her fingers instinctively reached into her pocket, searching for the brooch. But it wasn't there. A sharp pang of realization struck her. She had lost it in Robert's mansion. That brooch had been her only connection to her mother, and now it was gone. The loss of it made her sob uncontrollably. She stumbled forward, her cries echoing in the empty streets. The cold wind cut through her damp clothes, mocking her with memories of the fleeting comfort she had known at Robert's home. Her journey felt aimless, as if she were walking in circles through an unforgiving world. As she walked, Sophia began to notice the signs of street life she had tried so hard to forget. Figures huddled in doorways, their bodies bent and broken by the harshness of life. The air smelled of garbage and despair. People rushed past her, their gazes fixed firmly on the ground, too afraid or ashamed to look her in the eye. I don't want to go back to this, she thought. I can't take it anymore. But where could she go? Robert would probably believe Caroline's lies. Who would believe a street girl over a rich, sophisticated woman? The first raindrops began to fall, followed by a torrential downpour that blurred her vision. Desperately she ran, looking for any shelter. Her once clean clothes now soaked through and clinging to her body as she splashed through puddles on the uneven sidewalk. Sophia collapsed to her knees, the rough concrete scraping against her skin. The pain of the fall seemed to shatter something deep inside her, and she began to cry uncontrollably. Why doesn't anyone want me? She screamed to the sky. What's wrong with me? Her voice was nearly drowned out by the sound of the rain. Forcing herself to her feet, she continued her endless, aimless journey, each step harder than the last as exhaustion, cold, and despair threatened to overwhelm her. She passed dark storefronts, her own reflection staring back at her. A small, frightened girl alone in a cruel world that was far too big for her. The storm raged on, turning the streets into rivers. Sophia could barely make out the path ahead of her, the occasional flash of lightning offering brief glimpses of the road. During one such flash, she spotted a narrow alleyway between two abandoned buildings. Without thinking, she ran toward it. She huddled in the alley, trying to escape the fury of the storm. Her knees drawn up to her chest, she sought to hold on to the little warmth she had left. As the rain roared around her, Sophia allowed herself a fleeting moment of wishful thinking. What if things had been different? What if Robert had let her stay? What if he had wanted her? What if she had a home, a family? But the cold, damp reality of the alley quickly pulled her back to the present. She was alone. Abandoned. There was no one left to turn to. Defeated, she closed her eyes, exhausted. As the storm continued to rage, a mirror to the turmoil in her broken heart. His heart leapt in his chest when he finally saw Sophia, shivering and soaked to the bone from the relentless rain. He slammed on the brakes, not caring about the storm that whipped around him as he leaped out of the car. Sophia, thank God I found you, Robert shouted, rushing toward her. I was desperate, terrified I'd lose you. Sophia looked up, her eyes wide with fear, but as she saw him, the terror in her gaze shifted to a glimmer of relief. Robert, you came for me, she whispered, her voice almost drowned out by the heavy downpour. Without hesitation, Robert knelt down beside her and wrapped her in his arms, holding her close. Of course I did, Sophia, he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. I would never abandon you. I'll never let you be alone again. He gently lifted her up, feeling how much she was shivering, and quickly carried her to the car. Once inside, he cranked the heater up to full blast and draped his dry coat around her. Sophia, listen to me, he said, his voice steady but filled with concern. I don't know if it's a coincidence that you have my ex-girlfriend Elizabeth's brooch, but we were together in high school. When I went abroad for my studies, she broke up with me, saying I had a bright future, and she didn't want to stand in the way of my dreams. Robert took a deep breath. If your mother is really Elizabeth, I don't know what that means or how to explain it. But one thing I do know for sure is that you'll always be like a daughter to me. Since I found you, I've made a promise to protect you, no matter what. Whether you're my biological daughter or not, you're my daughter, heart and soul. He gently took her icy hands into his own, offering warmth as he spoke. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but these were different, tears of relief and hope. You really want to be my dad? She asked, her voice breaking softly. Robert smiled, his heart swelling with affection. More than anything in the world, Sophia, he replied. The journey back to the mansion was quiet, but it was comfortable, the heavy weight of the night slowly lifting. Sophia fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by the emotional roller coaster of the evening, while Robert drove, his determination renewed. Upon their arrival, Caroline was waiting by the door, her expression one of regret and anxiety. Robert carried Sophia inside, walking straight past his sister without a word. After making sure Sophia was warm and safe in her room, dressed in dry clothes and fast asleep, Robert turned to confront Caroline. His eyes were filled with anger. How could you leave a child out on the streets, Caroline? He demanded. She's just a frightened girl. She didn't deserve any of this. Caroline's voice rose sharply, her frustration clear. Didn't deserve it? Don't you see what Sophia's doing? Do you think it's a coincidence she has something that belonged to Elizabeth? She probably stole it, or worse, is using it to manipulate you emotionally. Robert clenched his fists, fighting to stay calm. You don't know that, Caroline. None of us do. But what I do know is that I won't turn my back on a child in need, no matter what your suspicions are. Caroline scoffed, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Paranoia? Is that what you call my concern for you? For our family? That beggar will ruin everything, Robert. She'll drain you dry and leave you behind when she's done. Enough! Robert shouted, his patience finally breaking. Sophia stays. She's part of our family now, whether you like it or not. If you can't accept that, maybe you're the one who should leave. Caroline's eyes widened in shock. You're kicking me out? Because of her? She gasped. A stranger you barely know? Robert exhaled slowly, trying to regain some composure. I'm not kicking you out, Caroline. I'm giving you a choice. Either accept Sophia and treat her with the respect she deserves, or find somewhere else to live. I won't tolerate any more of this cruelty. But before either of them could say another word, the smell of smoke filled the room. Caroline, do you smell that? Robert said urgently, interrupting their argument. The sound of breaking glass shattered the tension, followed by the rapid spread of flames that began engulfing the room. The heat was intense, forcing them both to retreat. Robert turned and sprinted up the stairs toward Sophia's room. We have to get out of here now, he shouted. Caroline, I'll get Sophia. Without waiting for her to stop him, Robert ran back into the burning house, the flames growing more frantic with each passing second. The thick smoke made it hard to see, and the heat was overwhelming. Robert covered his face with his shirt sleeve, coughing violently as he climbed the stairs. Robert, get out of there right now. Caroline screamed from below, panic in her voice. But Robert pushed forward, ignoring her cries. He knew he was risking his life, but he had to get to Sophia. Finally, he reached her room, where the flames were threatening to consume everything in sight. He searched frantically through the smoke and the haze, his heart pounding with fear. And then he found her still asleep, unaware of the chaos around her. Relief flooded through him as he scooped her into his arms. Sophia, wake up. We have to get out of here, he shouted, shaking her gently. What's happening? Why is everything so smoky? Sophia asked, her voice shaking with fear. The house is on fire, Robert replied, his voice tight with urgency. We need to get out of here now. He adjusted her in his arms and started running back through the hall, now fully engulfed in flames. The heat was unbearable, and the fire was closing in on them from all sides. Robert shielded Sophia as best he could, but the smoke was making each breath agonizing. They stumbled down the stairs, Robert struggling to maintain his balance as he carried her. At last, the front door came into view, and he could hear Caroline's desperate shouts from outside. They were so close, just a few more steps, and they would be safe. But the toll of the smoke inhalation and the effort of carrying Sophia proved too much. Just a few meters from the exit, Robert felt his legs give out beneath him. His vision blurred, and he staggered, unable to keep going. Sophia, run. Get out of here. Run, he gasped, forcing her to the ground before he collapsed onto the floor unconscious. Dad! Dad! Sophia cried, panic rising in her voice as she reached out to him. Sophia, wake up. I'm not leaving you here, she shouted, kneeling beside Robert, her voice cutting through the chaos outside as she stared at the mansion's shattered windows. Caroline, witnessing the scene in horror, panicked. Sophia, get out of there. Leave him and save yourself. He's not going to make it. Come on, get out. Her voice was thick with desperation, and she knew that's what her brother would have wanted. But Sophia couldn't bring herself to leave the man who had done so much for her, who had stood by her with a strength she never knew she had. She grabbed Robert's arms and began pulling him toward the door. I'm not going to leave you, Dad, she whispered, tears streaming down her soot-covered face. I won't abandon you, not after everything you've done for me. You said you'd never leave me alone, and I won't leave you. Every movement was a battle, and Robert's weight felt almost unbearable for her fragile frame. The flames were closing in, and the heat was almost too much to bear. But Sophia refused to give up. With one last burst of energy, she managed to drag him out of the house, both of them collapsing onto the cool grass of the garden. Caroline rushed toward them, her disbelief clear as she watched the scene unfold. Sophia, breathless and coughing violently, still clung to Robert, unwilling to let go even as the paramedics arrived. Emergency responders quickly rushed to help, while Sophia stood by, tears streaming down her sooty cheeks. Caroline, still gasping for air, looked from her brother to the girl, taken aback by the courage Sophia had shown in going back into the fire, risking both her life and Robert's. Something in Sophia's bravery and Robert's determination to protect the memories of his past touched Caroline in a way she hadn't expected. "Sophia," she called softly, her voice trembling. I'm sorry for everything. Please forgive me." Sophia approached slowly, her eyes darting between Caroline and Robert, who was now receiving attention from the paramedics. Caroline reached out and gently touched the girl's face. "You didn't run. You stayed. You saved him. That's true love. The kind of love that should exist in a family." Her voice quivered with emotion as she continued. "What you did, that's what family does. It's what we should be." In the weeks following the fire, Robert and Sophia slowly healed, both physically and emotionally. The mansion was reduced to rubble, but they had found a new home, a cozy apartment in the heart of the city. Caroline, deeply moved by everything that had transpired, had moved into a nearby apartment to give Robert and Sophia space to reconnect. On a bright sunny afternoon, Robert and Sophia sat on the porch of the new apartment, watching the bustling city below. The silence between them was peaceful, though it was clear there were questions left unspoken. Finally, Robert sighed, took a deep breath, and turned to Sophia. "Sophia," he began gently, "I think it's time we talked about your mother. Are you ready to discuss her?" he asked carefully. Sophia nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I miss her so much. She was kind. She was strong. She always told me that one day, we'd find my father," she said, her voice distant as she gazed into the horizon. Robert smiled softly, his heart aching for her. "What was she like? What was her name?" he asked, trying to keep his curiosity in check. Sophia paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts, before she finally spoke. "Her name was Elizabeth," she whispered. "Just like your ex-girlfriend." The name hit Robert like a jolt to the chest. His face went pale as his mind raced with possibilities. "Elizabeth," he repeated almost to himself. "Sophia, did you just say Elizabeth?" His voice shook with emotion. Sophia, confused by his reaction, nodded. "Yes, Elizabeth. Why? Do you think it could be the same one?" Robert paused, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never imagined that this could be more than a coincidence. "There could be two people with the same name and the same brooch," he said slowly. "But I'm afraid to get my hopes up. And I promise you, I won't leave you if they're not the same." Sophia looked at him, her voice filled with raw vulnerability. "Do you think, could you really be my real father?" she asked, her words thick with emotion. The room felt heavy with the weight of the moment. Robert closed his eyes, memories he had long buried rushing to the surface. "Sophia, I know I told you about Elizabeth, the one I met so long ago. I don't know if this is some incredible coincidence or a miracle, but I know one thing for sure. I would never leave you. I promised I wouldn't leave you alone, and I'm keeping that promise, no matter what." Sophia's eyes filled with tears once more. You really think you could be my father?" she asked, her voice trembling. The air between them was thick with the need for answers. In the following days, Robert arranged for a DNA test, and the waiting felt like torture, hope and fear battling within them. When the envelope finally arrived, both of them sat together on the couch, hands trembling as they opened it. Robert read the contents, his heart pounding in his chest. After a moment, he gently put the paper down, holding Sophia's hands in his. His eyes were filled with love and determination as he spoke. "Sophia, my dear daughter, there's so much I want to tell you. From the moment I found you that rainy night, something inside me connected with you. Now I know it was the call of blood, the bond between father and daughter." He paused, emotions thick in his voice. "I'm sorry for all the years we lost. for not being there to see your first steps, to hear your first words, to dry your tears when you fell. It breaks my heart to think of the nights you spent alone, scared, without anyone to protect you. You didn't know you had a father who would have moved mountains to keep you safe." Robert's eyes softened, filled with sorrow and love. "Please don't blame your mother. She probably thought she was doing what was best for both of us. She loved me, and I know she loved you too. I can't change the past, but I want you to know that from now on, I'm here. For every moment, for every laugh, every tear. I'll teach you everything I know, and I'll learn from you too." He smiled warmly at her, his voice full of promise. "You are the living proof of the love I shared with your mother, Elizabeth. She must have been an incredible woman, Sophia, to raise someone as kind, strong, and brave as you." He took a deep breath, his determination clear. "I see her in you every day. I promise, I will be the father you deserve. I'll love you unconditionally, support your dreams, and protect you from all harm. But I'll also give you room to grow, to make mistakes, and to learn from them. To become the wonderful person I know you will be." Robert's voice grew softer but no less resolute. "It won't always be easy. We'll face challenges, tough times. But we will face them together as a family. Because that's what we are now, Sophia. A family. You and me united not just by blood but by love. By the choice to be together." He smiled at her, his pride in her shining through. "I'm incredibly proud of you, of everything you've been through and how you've handled it. Your strength, your kindness, your courage. It's more than anyone could ever ask for. You are a miracle, Sophia." "My miracle," Robert said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me, my daughter. I owe you my life. And now, my dear girl, we have a whole future ahead of us. A life where we can get to know each other better, laugh together, and create our own traditions. A life for me, to see you grow into the incredible woman I know you will become." He paused, looking deeply into her eyes. "So, Sophia, my daughter, my heart, my reason to live, I make you this promise. From now on, you will never be alone again. You will always have your father's love, and I will always be here, right by your side, loving you, supporting you, guiding you. We are a family now, and nothing in this world will ever change that. I love you more than words can say." Sophia's eyes filled with tears as Robert spoke, and the feeling was mutual. She threw herself into his arms, sobbing with joy and relief. After all the pain and time lost, she had finally found her home, her father, and her family. And in that embrace, father and daughter silently promised one another that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, as a family, just as it should have always been. 6 months had passed since that transformative afternoon when Robert and Sophia discovered their bond. Life had changed completely for both of them, evolving into a journey of discovery, love, and healing. The mansion, once destroyed by fire, had been rebuilt, not as a cold imitation of its former self, but as a warm home filled with laughter and the beginnings of new memories. The walls, once decorated with expensive art, now proudly displayed Sophia's colorful drawings and pictures of the new family they had become. Robert had scaled back his work hours, making time for his newly found daughter. Together they explored the city, had picnics in the park, and spent cozy evenings reading stories. Every moment was precious, a chance to make up for the lost time. Under Robert's care, Sophia blossomed. Her eyes, once filled with fear and mistrust, now sparkled with joy and curiosity. She had begun attending a local school, making friends and discovering talents she never knew she had. Her laughter, which echoed through the house, was a sound that warmed Robert's heart every single day. Caroline, surprisingly, had become a constant and loving presence in their lives. The traumatic fire and Sophia's bravery had softened Caroline's heart, melting the icy walls she once kept around herself. She had become a loving aunt, always ready to spoil Sophia with gifts and funny stories about Robert's younger days. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, the family was gathered in the garden of their newly rebuilt mansion. Robert was grilling for a barbecue while Sophia and Caroline set the table for lunch. The air was filled with laughter, the delicious scent of food, and the warmth of their love. "Dad, do you think Mom would be happy to see us like this?" Sophia asked, her voice full of joy. Robert paused for a moment, a soft smile appearing on his lips. "I'm sure she would, dear. She's probably watching over us right now with that beautiful smile of yours that you got from her. I believe our reunion is her miracle. I think she's been looking out for us wherever she is. Sophia ran to him, throwing her arms around him in a tight hug, burying her face in his chest. I miss her, but I'm so happy to have you and Aunt Caroline now, she murmured. Caroline joined the embrace, her eyes glistening with tears she didn't share. And we're so happy to have you, Sophia. You've brought so much light into our lives. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth and love of his family, Robert felt a peace he had never known before. He looked up at the clear blue sky, thinking of Elizabeth, and the miracle she had left behind. Thank you, he whispered to the wind, hoping that somehow, somewhere, Elizabeth could hear him. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of happiness, laughter, shared stories, and the warmth of family. That night, as Robert tucked Sophia into bed, he couldn't help but smile at the sight of Elizabeth's brooch carefully placed on the bedside table. It was one of the few possessions to survive the fire, and in that simple object, the memory of Elizabeth lived on. It felt as though nothing could erase the love and memories they had shared. As Robert finished reading Sophia her bedtime story, he leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Good night, my love," he whispered. "Good night, Dad. I love you," Sophia replied sleepily. Robert smiled, his heart full. "I love you too. More than you can imagine." As he quietly closed the door to her room, Robert knew that no matter what the future brought, they would face it together, united as a family as it should have always been.